everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time zone you're in. Welcome to the second half of the second day of Hyperledger Global Forum 2021. I hope everyone's had a chance to enjoy a whole bunch of different sessions. There's been some really exciting ones that I've been in. We had a great event experience yesterday as well. That Accenture hosted a great trivia and DJ kind of event that was fun. I hope everyone's also been able to get some sleep and pace themselves. You know, meeting people, it can be very exhausting. And doing it in a virtual setting, very different than doing it when we were back on the Corona Ranch last year. But it works. It's been great. Today we have a great series of keynote speeches lined up for you this morning, and obviously lots more sessions this afternoon. But before we begin, I want to dive just into a couple of housekeeping bits and then a little bit of framing to get started. So I wanted to start out by expressing sincere thanks to all of the sponsors that help make this event possible, to our diamond sponsors, Accenture and IBM, as well as to our platinum sponsors, Filecoin Foundation, Hitachi, Siemens, and Zulig Pharmaceutical, as well as all the sponsors that both are here to lend their support. Many of them also have booths in the sponsor exhibit area, so please check that out through Hopin. I also wanted to remind everyone that all Hyperledger events, as well as all Linux Foundation events, are intended to be open, inclusive. We really want to get across that all are welcome here in the Hyperledger community. We have a code of conduct that applies to even virtual events like this. Please read it, please understand it, and please let us know if anything happens during the event that gives you pause or call for concern. With that, I want to just jump into a little bit of framing to help understand one of the unique things about the Hyperledger ecosystem has been just how global we've been from day one. And even in the midst of the pandemic, that global sense has continued to grow. We have over 180 different meetup groups that are active. We garden these pretty rigorously. We make sure there's leaders in each community, and those are spread across 81 different countries that host Hyperledger meetups. And this includes countries where even there's different systems for hosting these types of get-togethers, such as in China. And already this year, 60 different virtual meetups have been held so far. We've even had some face-to-face meetups. I'll show you photos from one pretty soon. We've also been launching some regional chapters and across that are collections of these different meetup groups. And across all of these, we've touched over 750,000 participants in the ecosystem. And this year, we worked really hard to put together groups of meetups in different regions, groups of those local communities to help each other get the word out about their events, to help find speakers who could speak across the different groups. And we've launched those chapters this year in Latin America, in Italy, in India, where we have a very active community spread across many different cities involving lots of folks from both academia and from the businesses that are based in India, as well as in Africa. Having these chapters together has been a really key way to build the local communities. And I'll show you one really exciting thing that's also emerged as a result. And we also recently announced the launch of our community in Japan. Japan has long been a part of the Hyperledger ecosystem. Several companies based in Japan have been on our governing board and helped make sure that we were solidly represented there. And now the local communities are really starting to blossom, and we couldn't be happier than to have a lot of healthy representation from the community there. And of course, this year has been really a stellar year for the China community. China has long been a core part of the Hyperledger ecosystem. We've long had a technical half of what we do based in China called the China Technical Working Group, who have been very active on supporting core developments in Fabric and other parts of the Hyperledger ecosystem. This year, they've started to meet face-to-face again. These are photos from December's meeting in Beijing, of the Beijing Hyperledger meetup group. I can't say anything other than it looks like another planet sometimes to those of us who've been at home operating from Zoom this whole time, but it's really great to see folks able to get back together and talk about the projects that they're working on and all that. And some of the direct result of working with these international communities has been not only helping make sure we're developing, interesting content in different languages. You have to speak to people in their first language if you want to really reach them with the information that we're putting together. And so there have been 13 different languages used to host meetups in the past year. That's really awesome. We also drove a contribution campaign around a couple of different projects, and in one that we did for Hyperledger Fabric around the documentation, we worked with many of the people in our meetup communities and beyond to develop translations of the core documentation in 8 different languages, and that would not have been possible without the support from our local communities. We also got translation set for the Hyperledger homepage. Not every blog post and everything else has been translated, but at least when it comes to landing on the site, trying to make sense of this community and its products and everything like that, and the different projects. We hope to have a more welcoming face now to speakers of all the major languages in the world. And finally, we also worked with a community to translate a Hyperledger course around Hyperledger Fabric into Spanish, and that was also really great to see. Another aspect of our communities that has long been important and only grew in importance this past year has been the special interest groups that we've been able to play home to. This includes longstanding ones like the healthcare working group, which obviously sprung to life in response to the pandemic. But also we've seen a lot of activity in our telecom and our climate action working groups that are today not just hosting every 2 weeks a conversation about the use cases and case studies where it's been applied to their sector, but are actually starting to drive projects in Hyperledger labs focused on their domains. And I'm really excited about the prospect of new software projects coming out of the labs and becoming projects under the greenhouse at Hyperledger. We also have invested, again, this is about the story beyond the code and beyond the immediate core developer community. A big part of that is education and training. And we've long had training modules on edX for just help people understand the basics of blockchain for business, to understand how self-sovereign identity works with Hyperledger, Indy, and Aries, as well as training and information around Fabric and Sawtooth and courses for those. Now we add to that a new training module, some new courseware that we launched this week around Hyperledger Besu, helping people understand, especially if they're coming from the Ethereum ecosystem, how to use that technology to how to use Besu to deploy permission blockchain networks. So this is really exciting, and I think going to be a key part of growing the community around Hyperledger Besu, but also help with that bridge between the permission networks and the public networks. We also have expanded a part of the Hyperledger website and really a part of what we do, which is about helping drive any commercial interest in the technology to the vendor community to go and be able to build this technology, build distributed applications and data systems for anybody who hesitates to climb the learning curve themselves. Right? We are seeing increasing interest from companies who say we want to deploy this stuff, but we need to figure out who's credible in this domain. Who can we work with? I can't hire the talent because it's still hard and not enough people have taken our course and certifications. So we've developed now a list of 24 different members of the Hyperledger ecosystem who can provide integration support, have products built on top of Hyperledger, all this kind of stuff to help go and deploy Fabric, Besu, Sawtooth, the different things that people want to have deployed. And finally, many of you might be asking, you might have a technical inclination. How do I get started? How do I look at what's available? Finding those starting points for early developers can be a challenge. So there's a lot of content in the sessions that come up today and tomorrow, as well as ones that are archived. You'll be able to access relating to demos of the software of different Hyperledger projects, where you can, if you're there at the time, you'll be able to meet the maintainers and build build that personal connection that we know is so important. We also have a presentation specifically on the challenges and the opportunity involved in pulling together different language support for different projects. The tooling to coordinate with translators is a really interesting and key part of what makes the projects like this work in an open source setting. Really quickly, I want to give you just a snapshot of the keynotes from the last segment of day 2, in case you missed them, in case they were at a time that didn't work. Last night, we had a panel on using blockchain technology to fight climate change with a number of people who are presenting here in other sessions at the event. Dr. Martin Weinstein, Andreas Kind, and Veronica Garcia. That was a ton of fun. Then we had a conversation between myself and Vitalik Buterin, where we really explored this sense of, what does it mean to apply Ethereum to the enterprise? What does that mean for the developer community, for the open source community that's grown up around that? We also had a really deep conversation between Marie Mastery from IATA and Drummond Reed, who's the Chief Trust Officer of Evernym, about reopening global travel using health credentials and using self-sovereign ID, using many of the technologies we pioneered here at Hyperledger. Today, though, we have an exciting series of keynotes lined up for you for the next hour and a half. First, we're going to hear from Rob Palatnik. Rob is the chair of the Hyperledger Governing Board and leads technology research and innovation for DTCC. I'll give him a separate intro in a bit. Just want to flash ahead to the others. After him, we'll have Kareem Yusuf, who is the general manager for blockchain technologies at IBM. And he has some really exciting things to announce in contributions to Hyperledger and other activity going on at IBM around blockchain technology. And finally, we'll hear from Mary Lassity, who's the director of the Blockchain Center for Excellence at the Sam Walton College of Business at the University of Arkansas. She's been studying the application of distributed ledger in supply chains and other systems for a very long time and has recently written a book on this, actually. So I really wanted to help give everybody here a sense of where is this industry heading? What is the big picture? What are all of the opportunities that are emerging out there? Do not forget, feel free to join the hallway track in Gathertown at any time, in between sessions, during breaks, after the sessions end for the day. Many of us are hanging out there. It's a little nerdy and goofy, but it feels a little bit like Legend of Zelda, but I like it, and hopefully it helps recreate some of the ad hoc conversations that many of you have at the face-to-face events until we're able to meet face-to-face again. Check out the networking feature in Hopin to meet other members of the community, and be sure and visit the Kiva booth to get your attendee gift, which is credit on the Kiva platform. The links to everything above are in Hopin. So with that, I'd like to transition to our first keynote speaker. Rob Palatnik is somebody that I've known since being involved in Hyperledger. I admit I didn't know who DTCC was before meeting him and before jumping into this project. DTCC is one of those really hidden gems. It's part of the core connective tissue that makes financial systems work, certainly that makes Wall Street and the equities markets work here in the United States, but also globally. And so understanding their interest in blockchain technology was a key part for me, saying, okay, I've got to dive in and figure this out, because this is a way that we remake how these core financial systems work. So really eager to have him speak and give his perspective as the chair of the Hyperledger Governing Board on where he sees the opportunities, where he sees the risks, what gets him excited, and what he thinks we need to do as a community to continue to meet up the opportunities. So with that, let me hand it off to Rob Palatnik.
Thank you very much, Brian. Hopefully my picture comes up and not the, don't forget, Gathertown. There we go. Probably most of the country hadn't heard of DTCC before the last few months, and when our CEO was actually testifying in Congress about the role DTCC plays in the financial industry and ensuring safe and sound markets, and how equity trades clear and settle. And he was actually asked in those hearings in U.S. Congress about distributed ledger and about some of the opportunity. So I'm very pleased to be virtually here with you and part of this amazing and inspiring community. For those of you who do not know DTCC, we're the primary financial services utility. We serve global markets. We provide the financial industry with a variety of regulated risk management, governance, and in the US, we're the primary clearing and settlement depository for equities and fixed income. In a couple of minutes, I'll come back to why a core, critical, centralized financial utility is so interested in open source enterprise blockchain. I am DTCC's Global Head of Technology Research and Innovation. I'm also privileged to be chairing Hyperledger's governing board for a third term. The governing board itself provides oversight and guidance to the Hyperledger project, but it's Hyperledger staff, overseen by Brian, and the committees and working groups, and all of you that are really the creative geniuses that make Hyperledger work. For me, these Hyperledger forums have become seminal moments. In January of 2016, literally 2 weeks after the announcement of Hyperledger's founding, DTCC hosted the very first Hyperledger meetup in our Jersey City offices just across the river from Wall Street in New York City. In December 2018, we had our first global forum in Basel, Switzerland, and 7 months later, our member summit in Tokyo, Japan, recognizing Hyperledger's global community. And of course, our last global forum in Phoenix, Arizona, and the event, as Brian has pointed out a number of times, at the Corona Ranch in the March of 2020, literally at the front door of the pandemic. And now this virtual gathering, where I think we're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel of our remote lockup. So here we are 5 years later, after starting with a few engineers that believed in a decentralized technology that distributes trust and eliminates single points of failure, that it couldn't be owned by a single proprietary vendor. And it really needed to be open source by definition. A small set of contributed code in that first set of meetings and that first set of engineering projects, now growing to 16 projects and growing, over 200 members, hundreds of global contributors, hundreds of thousands of lines of download, hundreds of thousands of downloads of code. I checked on GitHub last night, just looking at how many downloads there were. And many production implementations now in the financial industry, in the supply chain, in healthcare and shipping, and in a number of other industries. And it's a credit to all of you in industry, in government, in academia, at vendors, and as individuals that are helping move this community forward. So back to why DTCC is so interested in this technology. Can you bring up the slide, please? And how a central industry utility came to be among this esteemed group in the Forbes 50 in the blockchain list. And actually, we are one of the 12 enterprises in this list that have been on this list for all 3 years of its existence. DTCC's role in the financial industry is to ensure safe and sound markets, to provide risk management, to provide governance, and to ensure that when investors buy or sell their assets, that those transactions are settled with integrity and in conformance with all appropriate regulations. We saw in the technology platform of distributed ledger a generational opportunity to change an industry in a way that improves security, improves privacy, improves resiliency. But we also believe that adherence to regulations and open, accountable, and transparent governance really matter. Hyperledger, with its focus on open source enterprise blockchain, realizes that vision. We also understand that the real world of complexity means there are likely to be many different distributed ledger implementations. There will not be one ledger to rule them all. So it was important for that purpose that Hyperledger is open to many different open source stacks, and that within that community, we could develop tools and utilities to support all of those stacks, to support and enable interoperability. And probably the most important thing, create a community and dialogue that was open and not beholden to one single stack or one single model. and have a forum for engineers to have those core conversations that make products better. So we became a founding member of Hyperledger. We've contributed tens of thousands of lines of code. We've led a Hyperledger project. We've been open and giving talks about our progress. And perhaps most importantly, we're continuously experimenting and engineering with different tools in the Hyperledger toolkit. Fabric, Bezu, Sawtooth. In the labs group, we've been using the blockchain automation framework. So we've been plunging all in. For those of you who are just getting involved in Hyperledger and distributed ledger and are joining to see what the buzz is all about, I'd like to share 3 quick ways to get involved. Number 1, join Hyperledger. Our energy, our progress, and our vibrancy is all because of the efforts and passion of the community. They're developers, there are engineers, there are business users, there are writers, there are individual contributors. You'll join a movement that's focused on changing industries, and as you've been hearing at this forum, changing the world. As Brian has described, we're incredibly focused on being open and inclusive. And thank you, Brian, for pointing out that DTCC sponsored the closed captioning and translation for this forum. So please join, bring your friends. Number 2, contribute. This can come in many forms. It can be code, it can be leadership, it can be business use cases, it can be helping with documentation. It can also be feedback if you've used a product and have ideas for improvement. There are a wide range of projects that have relevance across many industries: digital identity, supply chain, emerging central bank digital currency projects that you've been hearing about, and all the different things going on in the labs. And 3, and most important, participate, collaborate, communicate, meet other like-minded people that want to do something important and help change the world. It's been said in previous forums that history is made by those who show up. So to all of you, congratulations for showing up and helping advance Hyperledger. A big thank you to Brian and the Hyperledger staff for supporting all of this great work and hosting these forums. So everyone have a great forum. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rob. And thank you, of course, for being a sponsor, for helping sponsor the translation services. Thank you as well for being an organization that doesn't just consume open source technology, but is actually there making contributions as well. DTCC has contributed to a number of projects, but has also really helped lead the Explorer project at Hyperledger and deserves a lot of credit for doing that. People might think it's all just done by the big boys or by the software vendors out there, but actually open source software is really also the end user community, so to speak, pulling together and helping build the different pieces. So thank you, Rob, for all of your support for the entire lifespan of Hyperledger. Now I'd like to transition to another talk I'm super excited about. We're going to be hearing from Kareem Yusuf, who's the IBM General Manager for AI Applications and Blockchain at IBM. Kareem has been with IBM for over 22 years and has held senior leadership positions in a variety of disciplines across the company. Today, Kareem will be talking about expanding the open source engine, powering enterprise blockchain solutions. And all of you know IBM's deep and sincere commitment to the Hyperledger project, and I'm really super excited to hear about what he sees happening next for that relationship. So please welcome Kareem to the stage.
Thank you ever so much, Brian. Appreciate the welcome and really pleased to be here with everyone. As Brian said, I lead the AI applications and blockchain business. And there we're really focused on how we enable our clients to automate mission critical workflows, leveraging both AI and blockchain to transform how they do work. And when you really think of how people do work and the actual business processes that are being executed, we live in an exciting time where blockchain is powering so many core processes that are taking place and being transformed in the enterprise. Consider, if you will, and I'm just going to try and get my chart changed again. 1 second there. Yes, thank you. Consider, if you will, what's just happened with New York State and the Excelsior project and what we've been doing, leveraging blockchain to essentially provide a digital health pass to successfully track and allow people to demonstrate whether they've been vaccinated or not. Think about what's going on in Norway. We have a customer we work with there called Quare. I needed to get the pronunciation right. Working with a business partner called ITEA, where we've been focusing on how we leverage blockchain technologies to support the tracking, tracing, and provenance of Norwegian salmon, and indeed broader seafood, because in that context, it's extremely critical to their business processes that the provenance be proven and the value be maintained. Or consider what's going on at Home Depot, where leveraging blockchain technologies, there's a core focus on invoice reconciliation. And when you think about that process of invoice reconciliation, which you may be forgiven for thinking is like, that's got to be maybe one of the least interesting things anybody does. But think about it. This is about bringing people together, agreeing on what needs to be paid and received. And it can always be a very contentious process. By leveraging key technologies like blockchain and really helping to automate, streamline, and smooth those interactions, you don't only drive business benefits, but quite frankly, improve the relationship with key suppliers. We're also seeing advances in the world of intellectual property. IPW is working leveraging blockchain technologies to fundamentally tokenize patents and make it easier for customers to begin to manage their patent portfolio, trading and managing accordingly as they progress with their business interests. Each of these examples, to my mind, speak to this very notion of addressing core business processes. And what I'm really fixated on and what I'm looking forward to is essentially the scaling and adoption of blockchain technology within the enterprise, supporting key business processes, transforming them and the way in which people work. And that can only be achieved if we have a vibrant and active Hyperledger community. Right today, I'm really excited to make a couple of announcements. First and foremost, we will be introducing, available in 3Q this year before the end of September, support for Hyperledger Fabric deployments. This means that customers looking to go live with enterprise projects based upon Hyperledger Fabric will be able to get a simple support offering from IBM to support their commercial deployment. This will be in the context of certified images running on Red Hat OpenShift, and we'll make it available to our Red Hat marketplace. But fundamentally, this just says you can now go forward into production feeling extremely secure and supported around your open source based project deployment. We're also announcing the contribution of key code contributions. And in particular, I want to focus in on the Fabric Operations Console. In our, what we would call it, commercial IBM blockchain platform, we built a management console to make it very easy to essentially create and instantiate and manage instances of a blockchain, link nodes together, all that good fun stuff. We are taking that entire capability, which has been proven in production over the last couple of years, and contributing that into Hyperledger Labs. This should fundamentally make it easier for everyone to be able to manage and deploy blockchains based upon Hyperledger Fabric. And so that ensures that we are enabling this notion of what I've called scale and adoption in the enterprise as we all fixate on getting people to do real work. We're also contributing some of the work that has been going on around Fabric tokens, the tokenizations we've been doing with some of the centralized banks in Europe, contributing that to continue to help drive that conversation forward. And I'm particularly interested in the work we can do around interoperability. We've made some contributions under Project Weaver, and in talking with others of you active in the community, looking at how we work together between Weaver and Cactus to ensure that we have a strong interoperability story. Because the more we drive this out into the enterprise, we need to be able to ensure that blockchains can effectively communicate with others, right? Permission blockchains can link with others. And we're seeing this even in work that we're doing today around food supply, in our food trust offering as people create micro networks that need to be linked with other networks, for want of a better word to describe it. And so this very notion of contributing code, driving vibrant activity, and ensuring that we are providing as an option a safe pair of hands to support deployment is essential to our ethos of how we move forward in supporting the community. So I'm hopeful and expectant that you all will get involved and jump in and start to progress this forward, because that's the only way in which we're going to actually make a real impact in business. I am very fond of saying, and I say this all the time, that technology is but a means to an end. And I say this as a deep technologist who has spent his entire career in and around software. That end is about driving value. It's about transforming what people get to do every single day. And to achieve that end, it's important that we all come together as a vibrant community with an eye towards use cases that are driving our innovation by deploying against real work. Real work, real business processes being automated, as I've already said, is to my mind the true arbiter of the value that we bring as technologists to the enterprise. Transforming those processes speaks to everything that we get done. With that in mind, when you think about that very notion of how we can collaborate, I like to think about it as a multi-stack diagram that you can come in at any level that makes sense to you, be you a developer, an ISV, a business partner, whatever it might be, a global systems integrator, various levels in which we can come together to play. Obviously, a lot of what we do is based upon Red Hat OpenShift and by extension, Red Hat Linux, right? We've been very focused on that. That in its own right is an open source based foundation. Built on top of that, Fabric. Just recently, what we can do around Fabric, how we can bring in innovation projects via the Hyperledger Labs and continue to evolve that level. We, within IBM, are then doing work on critical use cases that we want to spend our time on. I am particularly active in the realm of supply chain in my business, where we've been really focused most recently on the problems around food traceability. These translate very well into other what I would call responsible sourcing endeavors, whether you think about it around minerals, right? So think about mining, or you think about it around things like spare parts and their provenance. There's a lot that's going on as we think about core commodities that move within a supply chain and being able to effectively track them, trace them, and prove their provenance. That's also building forward into a lot of conversations we're having around sustainability. Think about e-waste disposal as an example, or think about being able to effectively track carbon footprints and emission impact of elements as they move through the supply chain. So lots of exciting work going on in there. And once again, welcome engagement as we look at how we advance this particular domain. Credentials are critical, right? We've been doing work around the vaccination passports. I know many others are doing the same. That represents a key area of focus. I think we will see a lot more beginning to evolve there. I'm particularly intrigued by things around learning and employment records. And when you think about this, you're really talking about how people are able to truly substantiate and prove their qualifications and make it very easy for employers to know what they are getting. Now, anything around credentials has to be appropriately, I would call it, encapsulated in key discussions around privacy, opt-in, opt-out policies, and those remain central and core. But you can also see how fixating on these kind of problem sets allows us to really streamline activities as people need to engage in, showing their credentials, as we've seen in just the experiments, I would say, prototypes being done in New York State around vaccines. And of course, a lot of work going on digital assets, which we can all play in. A lot going on in financial and indeed I would put IP here. So there are various use cases, and this is not an exhaustive list, but I like to think about engaging and partnering in the context of use cases, because that really allows us all to fixate on the end goal that we are looking to drive. Last but by no means the least, there's always the opportunity to build services around all this kind of work and support customers in their deployments and operations. So I think it's extremely critical as we think about this and as we lay out this stack will guide our engagement as IBM over the coming months and years as we continue to look at how we, first of all, drive innovation and vibrancy into the underlying Fabric community and Hyperledger community as a whole, because there are also key innovations to be done there. Build on that to address targeted use cases that we think are critical and encourage interoperability, participation, and engagement there in the context of serving our customers. And ensure, to bring this back to what I started with, ensure that we are therefore successfully enabling our customers to automate mission-critical workflows, leveraging AI and blockchain to transform how they do work. That digital transformation of how they do work, that enabling of new business processes or more efficient business processes is key and central to my mind to the end goal that guides all that we do. And I really just look forward to your ongoing engagement and partnership in this regards as we take this forward. So let me fundamentally end here with a little call to action. We will be having a webinar on June 30th to kind of dive deeper into some of these key code contributions and provide more information around our key support offering. And so we obviously welcome and invite you to join us there. But really, at the end of the day, this for me is all about engagement. And I'm really looking forward to engaging with you further as we go on this journey together to fundamentally enterprise in every which way we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Kareem. If you hang out for just a bit, it was really great to hear about these announcements. We've seen so much come in from IBM into Hyperledger Labs recently. This doesn't fit the narrative we hear out there in the press. You know, that enterprise blockchain is a contradiction in terms or is dead or anything like that. I mean, the pundits love to get kind of clickbait around that kind of stuff. This is a very different story. It sounds like things have grown quite a bit at IBM in terms of the business around this and the commitment. So just any other final thoughts on kind of how important this is to you all and to the growth of the ecosystem?
Yeah, look, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think when you think about pundits and clickbait, they tend to fixate on technology. I tend to fixate on its application. When you think about what's going on in IBM, and really when you think about what I've tried to emphasize here, this is all about use cases. You know, fancy technology that is not being used is just fancy technology sat on a shelf. And I think it's a disservice to the innovation, the contribution, the participation in the community that's taking place here in Hyperledger to fixate simply on, you know, the element itself without thinking about how is it being used, and most importantly, how does that usage drive innovation and evolution? Right? That to me is what is key and central. I see the same conversation taking place in AI. I'll give you a quick example of something to think about. We all talk about machine learning models. Nobody talks about what does it take to maintain and operate machine learning models in an enterprise context. When you've deployed that model, now you want to extend its features. You need to version that model. You need to correct that model. You've got software running in production. How are you updating that model? These are the things that we need to be thinking about and working on, not just, oh, how much cleverer is the next model, right? And this is what drives my passion. This is what I think drives our passion when I think about blockchain. I get fired up when I think about using it. And it is a key technology for enabling these use cases. When you speak to customers, as I said, I spend a lot of my personal time in supply chain. when you look at the problems they need to solve around commodities, when you hear about the challenges in food safety recall, I have had more conversations on leafy greens and yellow peppers than you might actually think can actually be occurring. I didn't even know all the stuff I now know about leafy greens. When you engage in those conversations and fundamentally recognize the problem set and realize that we can leverage blockchain to enable and address, you cannot but understand that the state of the union, as it were, is good. So yes, I am excited. Yes, I look forward to our further engagement and hopefully doing something like this again in person as things begin to open up and making a fundamental impact on how we engage and live as businesses leveraging these technologies.
Thank you. Well, there's a ton of questions that came in during your talk. I'm not going to ask them all. There was one that came in about the Fabric operations console. This is a big contribution. This is the key part, one of the key parts of IBM blockchain platform that now you're releasing as open source. And I think it speaks directly to that. Many of these questions you've asked about, how do we make this manageable? How do we make it make sense to enterprises? And so really wanted to thank you for that. In fact, there's a panel coming up in an hour with a deeper dive into the different contributions that IBM has made into labs to talk more about this and others with some heavy hitters on that panel. So I'll save some time, refer to that. Thank you again so much, Kareem, and looking forward to continued collaboration between IBM and the community.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Great. Next up, we have Dr. Mary Lassity. Mary is a Walton Professor of Information Systems and is the director of the Blockchain Center for Excellence at the University of Arkansas. She is also senior editor for MIS Quarterly Executive, a fellow of the American Association of the Association of Information Systems, and a certified outsourcing professional. Today, Mary will discuss 7 insights for executives to consider as they determine where blockchain-based solutions can add value for their own organizations and how to plan for implementation. Please welcome Mary to the stage.
Hi, Brian, and it's such a great pleasure to be here. So Brian, you may not remember this, but I first met you back in 2017 at MIT. And here we are 4 years later. We have grown so much as a global community, and I'm sure everybody here appreciates your leadership. You've been phenomenal. I'm really excited to have the opportunity to share what we've learned so far about blockchains for business. And my talking points come from our research that we do here at the Blockchain Center of Excellence. So it'll be helpful to have a little background on our center. Okay, so our center was actually officially launched by the governor of Arkansas, Asa Hutchinson, in the summer of 2018. And I love to put this picture up because it keeps me very focused and grounded on our mission. So we have the governor here at the podium, and he's kind of gesticulating to me because he's provided our seed money, and he wants us to be good stewards of our taxpayer dollars. And our mission is really to be an academic leader on both education and research on what I like to call blockchain-enabled digital ecosystems. I liked Kareem's talking points earlier that he just went, that we really don't want to focus on the technology. We want to focus on what it enables. And for us, it enables these digital ecosystems. Now, to meet our mission, I just have to brag about some of our students. So we've got full blockchain curriculum here at the University of Arkansas, undergraduate and graduate. Our students can earn minors, they can earn certificates, they can earn concentrations. We are technology agnostic, so our students learn about public and private blockchains. Brian will be happy to know that we have one course that focuses on Hyperledger Fabric, so all of our students in our programs learn how to do that. This is actually a snapshot of my class last Thursday. So I have 2 classes this summer, and in the upper right, on the upper left-hand corner, we have Dale Christie, who is head of blockchain strategy at Federal Express, who came and shared and gave of his time with our students. And Dale is one of our executive advisory board members. Our other executive advisory board members, you can see their logos here. Many of them are present at the Hyperledger Global Forum. So we just heard from IBM, we've heard from Accenture, we'll hear from Walmart. And so what we do with our executive advisory board members is we have these workshops where we bring together global visionaries, early adopters, we do case studies, we tackle big issues like shared governance, interoperability, scalability, the state of standards. And we're really excited to have all of these partners help us with our education and research mission. But we also have additional partners. So we engage with the startup community, we engage with other technology providers, and we engage with nonprofits. We also are very committed to open source standards. So our faculty and staff are involved in a lot of different communities. I'm personally very passionate about trust over IP and the Good Health Pass. Yesterday, Brian had a conversation too with Drummond Reed, he's a leader in both of these. And so I learn a lot from him as well. So today, Brian asked me to talk about some recent research. We had just published this in MIT Sloan Management Review called What We've Learned So Far About Blockchains. And so my co-author and I, what we like to do is study early adopters. So there are essentially many case studies, and we go to the case studies and ask questions like, how did you put together your minimal viable ecosystem? How did you deal with shared governance? How did you sell the solution to your C-suite? What kind of challenges did you have? How did you overcome those challenges? And then hopefully the lessons that we're learning from these first generation blockchain enabled digital ecosystems will be a benefit to other enterprises who might be a little later on their adoption journeys. So here's just some of the case studies that went into the research project. Brian had mentioned we are heavily focused on supply chains here in Northwest Arkansas. So we have many supply chain examples, but we also have case studies in financial services, credentials, and news story integrity. So what I thought I would do here today for this community is I'm going to share a new statistic that I don't think Brian's even seen yet. Then I'm going to do one little mini case study. And then from that case study, I'll talk about the broader talking points across all of our case studies. All right, so yesterday, Brian, when you launched the event, you put up some really cool statistics from Deloitte and PwC, and I wanted to share another recent study that was done by one of my favorite advisory firms. They're called HFS. I've been engaged with them for about 10 years now. And about 2 weeks ago, I was on an email exchange with Phil First, who's the CEO and founder of HFS. And he was excited because they had just done an analysis of a survey of 800 global 2000 enterprises. And when I saw this question, I'm like, I have to have that to share at the Hyperledger Global Forum, and I had permission to do that. So one of the questions that was asked was, do you see investments in blockchain increasing, decreasing, or staying the same over the next 12 to 18 months? And we can see here that 76% of global 2000 enterprises are intending to increase their investments in blockchain. So now we're starting to get a triangulation of lots of different surveys from different places that are all bullish on blockchains for enterprises. So we're all here in a good time to be together. So the little mini case study that I decided to share with you is called DL Freight, a blockchain-enabled solution by Walmart Canada and DLT Labs. Now, Kareem, I do have to disagree with one statement you made. You said invoice reconciliations was a boring use case. It's not boring. It can be very exciting because it can add a lot of business value. And so when I'm done this case study, I want the audience to think, can you hear it? Can you hear the requiem, the death mass for reconciliations? So I picked this little case study among all of our cases for 4 reasons. One, the problem of invoice reconciliations is absolutely ubiquitous. 2, the solution was built on Hyperledger Fabric, so I thought that was appropriate for this community. 3, It was one of the fastest deployments that we had studied, as you will see. And most importantly, we have evidence that it did provide business value for all of the ecosystem solution partners. I also want to introduce you to my fabulous co-author. He's the co-author on the MIT paper, as well as on this case study, Professor Remco van Hoek. He is a professor of practice. He had a whole career in supply chain management before coming back to academia. He was head of procurement at Disney. So he brings the supply chain management expertise to our research. And hopefully by this time I bring a little blockchain expertise. Now I'm only going to do a couple of findings from the case study, but anyone out there, you can go to our website, blockchain.uark.edu. If you go to our research page, you can see this 20-page case study along with the other work that we do here. All right, so let me give you an overview of the context. So it's Walmart Canada. They have net sales of over $18 billion. They have over 400 retail stores, 11 distribution centers. They process about 500,000 shipments per year. And Walmart Canada does have its own fleet of freight carriers. I mean, every time you're on a highway, you'll see a Walmart truck go by. But they also engage with up to 70 freight carriers. Some of their freight carriers are quite large, right? These can be very large transportation companies. But some of them are kind of more like mom and pop operations with just a few trailers. So it's important for you to just hear what I said about the characteristics of this ecosystem. We have a large and powerful retailer. We have some large and powerful freight carriers all the way down to the mom and pop ones. Okay, so what was the business problem? And as Kareem had talked about in the prior keynote, there's lots of problems with invoice reconciliations. And at this context, 70% of the invoices would be in dispute at any given time, right? And that is common across different industries. And many of you know how complicated an invoice can be. So in the freight context, a single invoice can have over 200 data elements. But you don't have to just take my word for it. So I decided to embed a quote from one of the people we interviewed, and his name is Sergey Believe. And at the time, he was the Chief Information Officer at Walmart Canada. He has since become an Executive Vice President at DLT Labs, the solution provider of DL Freight. And he said, you know, for all these invoices in dispute, they had a small army on both sides trying to chase down facts, things that could have occurred weeks before. The payments were outstanding, which of course is going to be a strain on the financial stability of the carrier community. Relationships were strained as well. It revolved a back and forth of who's right and who's wrong. And this thing wasn't working for anybody. So these, and I loved Kareem's point when he talks about the complexities. And of course, these are complex issues. So in this short keynote, I'm only going to focus on two root causes of the problems that led to 70% of these invoices being in dispute at any given time. Okay, one of them is the fact that all of these trading partners have their own systems of record, right? So Walmart Canada has its ERP system, its transportation management system. The large freight carriers have their ERP systems and transportation management systems. The mom and pops might have had a spreadsheet if we are lucky. And of course, you got to get these records to match and be reconciled before the payment terms go into effect and the carriers can get paid. The other problem is when the invoices were generated. And this is true of many, many invoice processing systems. They did not get generated until after final delivery, right? So you can imagine the drivers have gone home. You know, what happened that day? It's very hard to chase down facts after the fact. So after Walmart Canada adopted this solution in partnership with DLT Labs, and they did a pilot with some of their large freight carriers, the after solution is now DL Freight is a blockchain-enabled digital ecosystem. And inside the blockchain network, there is one shared version of the invoice. But the magic of it is how they change the business process. So with DL Freight, the invoice gets built along the supply chain journey. So now the invoice gets initially populated when Walmart Canada does its tender offer. So they can put the driver instructions, they can put the known charges. Now the freight carriers are connected to DLT freight, to DL freight with IoT devices inside the trailers. So it's pinging the blockchain ecosystem with GPS location. So now you always know where the shipment is, with temperature readings if you're tracking things like produce or meat or dairy. And then by the time final delivery is made, the carrier just has to add the final accessorial charges at the end. And the invoices are now agreed upon within 24 hours. So it's a much, much better solution. So I promised you that this solution delivered business value. I'm having a little trouble with my clicker application. Here we go. Okay, so I promised you that I was going to share with you the business application from the solution. We went from 70% of those invoices being in dispute to fewer than 2%. So that means 98% follow what I call the happy path. But even now, when there is a discrepancy, it gets solved much quicker, right? Because there's an excursion from a smart contract, we investigate it, it can get done very quick, much quicker. There is more transparency. So even the small carrier said, you know, this is great. I can finally see the rates and shipment details that Walmart uses and applies. There is significant ROI. I'm not allowed to say what the number is, but there's significant ROI. Believe me, you'd all be impressed. But the freight carriers are thrilled too, because they are getting paid the right amount on time. So the payment terms are now going into effect after 24 hours instead of days, weeks, or sometimes months. When you pay your partners the right amount on time, it leads to better carrier relationships. And of course, this also presents so many more opportunities. So now we have business intelligence where you can track the provenance and freshness and transportation conditions. You do more analytics like, you know what, this route doesn't ever work. It's always clogged up. Let's find another route going forward. There are also new opportunities for new revenue streams. So before, Walmart Canada never felt comfortable offering financing services to their freight carriers. There's just too much uncertainty. How do you build a risk model when there's so much opaqueness? But now with the transparency and you can do a risk model, and so you can offer financing services. So hopefully you get a sense of, you know, these first generation solutions coming together to deliver business value for the ecosystem partners. Now, I'm going to just mention two statistics because, again, invoice reconciliations are a huge, huge problem. And so in our paper here, so this is the paper if you can go download, I'm going to read you two statistics, right? Number one, up to 38% of invoices are overpaid because enterprises think, you know what, it's just going to cost me too much and too much of a pain to try to figure this out. So they just decide to overpay it. Now, in the transportation industry, and this number, I apologize, it's US centric. It's in the US every day, there is $140 billion worth of invoices in dispute every single day. So hopefully this little case study and other case studies you'll be exposed to at the Hyperledger Global Forum can show us a better way. Okay, with that, now Brian had said I was going to give you 7 lessons, but I decided to give you 3 bonus ones. So we're going to do a top 10 list, our top 10 learnings from across our case studies. Number 1. Okay, applications are business-led collaborations, and you know, blockchains are really just a backstory. So what do I mean by that? So the first generation solutions, the trading partners came together because they're trying to solve a shared pain point in the ecosystem. Or maybe there's a new regulation that everybody in the industry has to comply with, and it's going to be much more efficient to come together and solve it once as a community than every individual enterprise trying to do it. And we saw this over and over again in our case study. So yesterday, Frank Yanis was one of the keynote speakers. He's now at the FDA, but when he was at Walmart, he was in charge of food quality and safety. He was trying to address the real problem of tracing food from the retail stores back to the farm. It was taking too long. And so they got together because they're trying to address this very serious problem. And blockchains weren't even in the conversation until they brought their technology partner in, which was IBM, who said, you know what, this is actually a really good enabling technology for what you're trying to do, connecting your supply chain partners. So I always say I really don't like being the center director for the Blockchain Center of Excellence because it puts blockchains in the forefront. First thing I do with my students is say, let's talk about all the situations where we shouldn't use blockchains, right? It's about fit, finding the right context where these technologies make the most sense. All right, number 2, the solution has to create business value for each participant type. So that's kind of an obvious statement, but you really do have to learn to stop saying what's in it for me and look at it as what's in it for us. And many times you're going to have to do things like tiered pricing to bring on smaller players who are less powerful or have less able to make investments in technologies. You're going to probably give this software away for free to your end consumers, right? You're going to probably have them download apps. So you have to think about the different business value, and it's going to be different for the different stakeholders in the ecosystem. All right, number 3. I love this one. Okay, so as an academic, I can't leave a stage without mentioning a theory. And all of those of you out there who have an MBA are certainly familiar with Clayton Christensen's theory of disruptive innovation. And over 3 decades, he continued to observe that the incumbents, the traditional enterprises, many of the companies who are here at the Hyperledger Global Forum, you're going to say you're going to disrupt yourselves, but you're not going to. What you're going to do is you're going to do what he characterizes as sustaining innovations. That's improving your products and services for your clients with your existing business models, right? And that's exactly what we're seeing with these first generation solutions. You can think of them as a gentle rising tide that's raising all the ships in the ecosystem. It's not a tidal wave of disruption yet. Disruption is coming, make no mistake. And Clayton Christensen's theory says that that's going to come from spin-offs and startups. It's not going to come from incumbent enterprises. And the problem and the challenge that we have here is disruption is on a path right now. And when it finally hits, we can turn around in the rearview mirror and see the clear path. And people say, how did they miss it? How do you miss it? It's got such a clear path. It's because when you go back in time, there's 2,000 other paths that are also being pursued. And you have to, it's hard to figure out and monitor 2,000 different paths. But we are going to end up with both sustaining and disruptive innovations. All right, now these first generation solutions, there was a lot of sweat equity that went into these. 80% of the effort was management effort, and only 20% was the blockchain effort. So let's talk about external management effort first. That's when you have the representatives from the different enterprises that come together and in your little consortium, whatever. And of course, you're going to battle and fight, but then you're going to iron out what are our data standards, what are our business rules, what is our governance, and you go what I call native. So you go native. And then you kind of have to go back to your internal organizations and do all this selling again, selling your C-suites, dealing with your compliance people, perhaps involving HR. All right, so that means that you're going to have a business opportunity that is going to be big enough to warrant all of this management effort, plus the effort of the technology, to compensate for the costs and the different risk profiles that you're going to have to manage when solving and creating these blockchain-enabled digital ecosystems. The best solutions minimize change management. So I'll use the example of DL Freight since I just talked about it. So think about those little mom and pop freight carriers, right? They don't have ERP systems. So how are you going to connect them in a low-cost way? Well, DLT Labs operates a web portal on behalf of the smaller carriers. So now these carriers can access it by uploading documents directly to the DL Freight solution. They didn't have to do a lot of other stuff to connect. So trying to make the onboarding as painless as possible. Now, the large carriers connect to it through APIs, and that takes about 4 or 5 weeks because you got to go through all of your vetting when you're connecting to external systems, but you're not disconnecting your systems of record. They're serving as data feeds to these blockchain applications. All right, number 6. All right, everyone in this community knows this, but it's a good talking point when you're going back to your C-suites that blockchains are not all data for all, that data must be confidential. As an example from the DL Freight case, a freight carrier can only see its invoices that it has with Walmart Canada. It has no idea all of the other activities, business activities that Walmart Canada has with the other freight carriers. Number 7. In our study, blockchains were choosing private permission solutions over public blockchains, but that may change. So first of all, why are we seeing so many permission blockchains with our first generation? Well, you have to think about many of these solutions take a while if you're working with ecosystem partners. So what we see today that might be live for a couple years probably started in 2016 or 2017. And remember, Ethereum didn't even launch until the summer of 2015. So when they were thinking it through their solutions, public blockchains were really not on the forefront of enterprises. But that is changing and changing rapidly. So one of our executive advisory board member firms is EY. They're really committed to public blockchains and in particular to Ethereum. They've already developed multiple enterprise systems on public blockchains or have hybrid models. So that may change in the future. Again, I'm not going to make any predictions here. I believe that the world is emergent, not deterministic. And where we end up is going to be the result of all of the conversations we're having today, all of the lessons we're going to learn from early adopters, all of the effort we put into these open source communities. All right, number 8. Okay, there's lots of people that I love to learn from. And one of my favorite people in this space is John Wolpert. I'm giving you a shout out. Every time he talks, he'll give me some kind of soundbite that'll just rattle around in my brain for a couple days. And the last one he said that just really resonated with me is he said, blockchains are digital nudist colonies. Public blockchains are public beaches and private blockchains are private beaches. So from his perspective, the only thing we should be putting on our blockchains are immutable proofs that events occurred and that we shouldn't be sharing a lot of data. So now we've got different, we've got a lot of different models out there that are emerging for enterprises, permission, public, you share data, you don't share data, you just share proofs of events. And I think we're going to end up with a very rich set of solutions because the world is complex. We're not going to end up with just one. All right, number 8. There's still trusted third parties, people, right? So all of you have probably read Satoshi Nakamoto's Bitcoin white paper back in 2008, and the impetus for the first blockchain was to get rid of trusted third parties. But for these first generation solutions, we're not seeing the elimination of trusted third parties. We're seeing that they take on different roles. So while they're not sitting in the middle of transactions, they are doing a lot of managed services, doing things like taking care of custody of digital assets, doing things like auditing smart contracts before they're deployed, or managing the nodes in the network, or most importantly, helping with software upgrades. If you think upgrading software within the boundaries of the firm is tough, it's much tougher when you are doing this across firm boundaries. So we do see that there are trusted third parties. And Brian just earlier today just put up a lot of vendor communities because there is a demand and a need for help. All right, here's my last talking point. These first generation solutions are going to have to evolve or they will die. There are concerns by enterprises of vendor lock-in. They don't want that situation to happen. So the ones that we have today, the ones that will stick around are going to be the ones that add product features. Remember, we're starting with minimal viable ecosystems, developing minimal viable products. Well, the products have to evolve with additional features. They have to be able to attract additional ecosystem partners. And most importantly, going back to what all of the speakers have talked about so far, is this need for interoperability, creating networks of networks. Because ultimately, what enterprises and customers want is the ability to share digital assets in a seamless way. All right, with that, Brian, I am done with my talking points.
Okay.
And I think you're not going to leave me hanging. I think you're coming back.
I'm not going to leave you hanging, I promise. Thank you, Thank you, Mary. That was just an amazing collection of different observations. The lessons learned, really powerful. We had some commentary and questions from the chat. So while we pull that together, there's some things that occurred to me as I was listening. So one of them is, I mean, you cited the 80% management overhead, right, in the development of these technologies, which I can certainly concur with. Something we see a lot. Do you think there are things that the technologists can do that we can build into these systems at whatever level, at the ledger layer or up above, that lessen that overhead? That make it easier to get past some of those?
We would, yes. I think you're already starting to do that and starting to build those today. So right now, it's not these are not easy technical solutions, right? So let's even just talk about public blockchains. I'm going to say even most of my students rely on exchanges, right? Because it's not easy to manage your own digital assets, on your cell phone. And in fact, that all you have to do is lose your Bitcoin once and you learn your lesson, right? So once these become easier to use and easier to engage in, yes, I think that we're going to see a different balance of that effort. The other thing is it's still early days. Just like we had at the beginning of the internet, enterprises were adopting intranets and they were afraid, and it took a long time before now it's just a no-brainer, right? You pop up a website, you don't have to go through all of that vetting. So it's still early days. We're still all learning together. I hope the balance will eventually change. The other thing is, as we get governance models, so there's a lot of technology standards, but one of the reasons why I'm excited to participate in the trust over IP and the governance stack is developing governance frameworks so that we don't have to have the same painful conversations over and over and over again. And you had Drummond Reed as a guest on that. Him and Scott Perry are leaders in our governance stack, and I highly encourage this community to look at it. So yes, it will get easier.
In fact, I wanted to ask a little bit about the governance kind of question too, because I see an interesting dichotomy out there. A lot of folks in the public blockchain space are very committed to this idea of kind of algorithmic governance, that most decisions can be made by an up or down vote, amongst people voting with the amount of stake that they have or something else. Proposals even for changes in the underlying technology can be voted up, down, right? Versus others who think that governance in these kinds of systems is almost unavoidably and necessarily a human kind of process, driven a bit more by consensus, by hearing of differences. In the networks that you see being built, and where you see like the trend line, do you see a balance between these two? Do you see much more heavily human, or should we be more automated? But that's all problems.
I see human, mostly because we're talking about enterprises, right? And even when we use the terms like deploying smart contracts, right, that is essentially instantiating business rules today. But a real contract has all kinds of ambiguity, like change of character clauses or goodwill effort. So I don't see that we're going to have on-chain governance as a preponderance of the governance model for many of the types of applications that I'm looking at in enterprise situations. Now, the other ones, if you're talking that you could put bounds around something, right? Like the EOS would be a good example. If you say, this is what our community agrees to, we never want to change it, then you can do on-chain governance. So it's not necessarily an either or, it's really suiting the governance mechanism to the application. But you asked the question, what do I see? I study traditional enterprises. It's human governance.
I'm on team human as well. But I do like automating things. And I back to the earlier point about the 80%. I think it is a lot of trust building. I remember building corporate websites in 1993. Do the math, and how much trust building was needed at that time to not just explain the technology to people, to get them to understand why this isn't a wacky thing. So team human for sure. But one of the things that also comes up when we talk about governance is the government, and I didn't notice there wasn't any mention. Maybe I missed it in the top 10 list of regulators and the role that they play. And we talked a fair bit about this with some of the other keynote speakers. What role do you see them potentially playing in standing up these networks, in being a part of these networks, in setting rules for these networks? I mean, where do they fit in all this?
Okay, well, again, I'm primarily studying enterprise ecosystem. So for example, the Ledger, which you're very familiar with, right? So the regulator there is, the FDA with the Drug Supply Chain Security Act. So they're kind of, at least they have a roadmap of what needs to be done to comply with that regulation. I think the harder one is when you really talk about payments, right? So when you're talking about traditional payments, we just had a guest speaker. And you're probably asking the wrong person, Brian, because who I'd love to just pull up next to me is we have one of the leading professor lawyers from our law school here. Her name is Professor Goforth. She literally wrote a book on crypto transactions. She monitors this space. She posts on Cointelegraph. And she came and talked to the students last week saying, there is a lot of regulatory ambiguity that different parts of the government say that these digital assets are securities. Some say they're property, some say they're commodities, and keeping up with it is quite a challenge. With that, I'm very optimistic. I certainly like Biden's choice for who's going to run the SEC. I'm very optimistic about looking at Wyoming as a test case with all of their crypto regulations and their enactment of the speedy banks. I think the rest of us can learn from them. So I'm not one, I just want to go on the record of saying, I am not anti-regulation. I want to live in a society that protects citizens, protects the environment, protects investors, and bringing them into the conversations with us is probably the most important thing that we could do. We're all still learning together.
Yeah. Well, on the regulations front, I mean, there's the view of regulations as kind of the barrier or the reins on innovation and progress. There's also a view that maybe regulation might be a driver for some of these use cases, that actually to meet those existing regulations that pre-exist blockchain and don't even talk about blockchain, maybe there's a way to use this technology to better meet those. So there's a session coming up at the end of tomorrow on Open IDL that I encourage you and others to check out. It's a new insurance network that actually the Linux Foundation is helping stand up, specifically focused on meeting regulatory reporting in the insurance industry. So, and there actually the regulators are asking for these kinds of functions. They've become fans of the technology as a form of reg tech. So really eager to get your take on that at some point down the road. We had a question come in, which was a little bit about playing on, I know you mentioned a bit, the question, how do you onboard smaller companies onto these kinds of networks? You mentioned that they'll probably be in the form of web-based onboarding through, proxies, through organizations that run one of the core nodes. Can you speak any more about how do we make sure that startups are vested as participants in these ecosystems and given a sense of agency, and it doesn't, these kind of networks that we see built don't just come down to the five big boys kind of defending their terrain?
Yes, I think you do it one ecosystem at a time. So our senior managing director, Catherine Carlisle, works very closely with Heifer International. And that's a small well, I shouldn't say small, that's a nonprofit. They have a lot of traceability for coca from farm to retailer, trying to empower farmers. So I think it's done by one ecosystem at a time. And will also say, I know there's a lot going on at GS1 where they're trying to bring together the different food platforms to address issues of interoperability. Kareem had also mentioned that in his prior keynote.
Right. Well, the nerd in me says, the more that we can also make it easy to always add one more node to the network, always add one more ability for a new voice to come in and be able to confirm transactions, broadcast transactions, participate in the ledger, participate in the ecosystem, the more I think we have a response to concerns about hegemony and antitrust and those sorts of things. So really fascinating range of topics. Thank you so much, Professor Lassity, Dr. Lassity.
Mary, I'm married to you, Brian. I honor you. Believe me, I've learned so much from you over the years. So looking forward to the rest of the program. Can't wait to hear the rest of your keynote. So have a great rest of the day.
Okay, and Mary was also far too humble to mention she has authored a book recently on enterprise blockchain technology on many of these topics. Be sure and check that out. Mary, thank you so much. And let's transition now just to wrap up this section. Yeah, let me get my notes. Thank you all to the speakers for this stretch. We now have a break before the next set of sessions begins at 9:40 Pacific time, obviously 40 minutes after the hour, no matter where else you are. So go stretch, get some coffee, get a snack, come to the vendor booths. So many of these vendors have put together an amazing set of content for you and engagement. So please come visit those, or the hallway track, or the networking session. And then at 40 minutes after the hour, come back for an amazing set of breakout sessions, and have a great day.